All right, so I'm back. All right, hopefully everything sounds good. I'm going to go back to what I was talking about, so I had to restart my video. All right, so the title is dealing with public housing projects, and now as I mentioned, going back to the beginning. All right, going back to the beginning. So, because I had some sound issues throughout the whole video, I didn't even know that. But anyway, so going back to the beginning, the whole purpose of me talking about this video about public housing projects because I don't think a lot of people really understand the history behind it. It's like, there are those who blame people for actually being in the situation they're in as if they chose to be in that predicament and it's not the case. Okay. So when we get into understanding about how people cannot afford to move in decent communities and decent areas of what you call the suburbs, they had to take what was given to them. Okay. So in the last video I've done, I talked about the ghetto. All right. So, or what, the history behind ghetto, the origin of it, how it came into existence, etc. Now we go into the transition about public housing. And how did we get to that point? How is it that you see majority of African Americans in the public housing? Now today, is not too many of them left, especially where I'm at. So a lot of them been torn down. Okay. So the thing is, now people are like pretty much forced to live in regular apartments. They're trying to put in mixed income communities, affordable housing. But then the question becomes, what is affordable housing? When you think about it, if you try and build affordable housing, affordable to whom? And based on what income? So getting into this concept, we have to really understand, we have to really know the history of how these things came into existence. All right. So now I'm glad that you guys are able to hear me better. Now let me kind of go back to the articles that I was using. Okay. Um Trying to see what was the article at. Let me the one that I had. So I was reading from an article from CDC. Okay. So CDC stand for Center for Disease Control and Prevention, right? Now let's go ahead and let's look at what they talking about here. So basically to explain public housing project in a colloquial sense, right? According to this article, it says safe, affordable housing is a basic necessity for every family. Without a decent place to live, people cannot be productive. Members of society, children cannot learn, and families cannot thrive. All right, this came from Tracy Kaufman, research associate, National Low Income Housing Coalition. Now, here's the introduction. The introduction says the term shelter, which is often used to define housing, has a strong connection to the ultimate purpose of housing throughout the world. The mental image of a shelter is a safe, secure place that provides both privacy and protection from the elements and the temperature extremes of the outside world. All right, so the best way to understand public housing is basically a shelter. That's the best way to understand it. It's a shelter provided by the government for people who make low income, all right, and who cannot afford to move anywhere else. So the whole thing is instead of just putting folks off on the streets and let them roam the streets, right, with children, well, hey, let's provide little housing for them so that way they can have somewhere to live. But they have to meet certain criteria. All right. So that's the whole general purpose of the public housing project. It's to provide a shelter for the poor people. Okay. So now going into this, let's go down and talk about pre-urban housing. Okay, different dwellings, etc. I'm not going to go through all of that. Now it goes into urbanization. Check this out. It says in the Western world, one of the primary forces driving urbanization was the Industrial Revolution. The basic source of energy in the earliest phase of the Industrial Revolution was water provided by flowing rivers. Therefore, towns and cities grew next to the great waterways. Factory buildings were of wood and stone and matched the housing in which the workers lived in, both in construction and in location. All right. And it goes on to say workers' homes were little different in the urban setting than in agricultural homes from whence they came. However, living close to the workplace was a definite advantage for the worker of the time. When the power source for factories changed from the water to coal, steam became the driver and the construction materials became bricks and cast irons, which later evolved into steel, increasing population in cities and towns, increased social problems in overcrowded slums. The lack of inexpensive, rapid public transportation forced many workers to live close to their work. These factories areas were not pastoral areas in with which many were familiar, but were bleak with smoke and other pollutants. All right. So it says the inhabitants of rural areas migrated to ever expanding cities looking for work. Between 1861 and 1911, the population of England grew by 80%. All right. But let's go up to where they were talking about the let's go further down. So it talks about the trends in housing, right? So it says the term tenement house was first used in America and dates from the mid 19th century. It was often intertwined with the term slum. Wright notes that in English, tenements mean an abode for a person or for a soul when someone else owns the property. Slum, on the other hand, initially was used at the beginning of the 19th century as a slang term for a room. So by the middle of the century, slum had evolved into a term for a back dwelling occupied by the lowest members of society. So von Hoffman states that this term had by the end of the century begun to use interchangeably with the term tenement. The author noted additionally that in the larger cities of the United States, the apartment house emerged into the 1830s as a housing unit of 2 to 5 stories, which each story containing apartments of 2 or to 4 rooms, which was originally built for the upper group of the working class. The tenement house emerged in 1830s when landlords converted warehouses into inexpensive housing designed to accommodate Irish and black workers. Additionally, existing large homes were subdivided and new structures were added, creating rear houses and, in process, eliminating the traditional gardens and yards behind them. These rear houses, although new, were no healthier than the front house, often housing up to 10 families. When this strategy became inadequate to satisfy demand, the epoch period of the tenements began. All right. So basically, to break it down, the tenements were the pre public housing. They were the pre housing before public housing came into existence. All right. So they were very cheap, inexpensive, but they were not in great condition. Oftentimes they were dilapidated, right? Not only they were dilapidated, they were unsanitary. So they were far more worse than how public housing were. They were far more worse because the people that lived there, they lived in under malnutrition. They suffer in a horrible condition. Okay, so they pretty much got what they paid for, right? So you talking about no running water? The roof is leaking. You know what I'm saying? You ain't got that many bedrooms, and then when you wash clothes, you gotta wash your clothes and hang them outside, which is very common in the South. You know, we hang our clothes on the line, etc. But that's just how it was because the people was living in poor condition. They couldn't afford to move anywhere else, so they had to make do with what they had. And when the tenements were torn down, that's when the public housing came into existence. They were replacing those tenements. Okay. All right, so let me find something else on this article. Then let me go to the one that I was talking about, the public housing. Okay. So it says, although unpopular, the tenement house grew in numbers, and by the 1850s in New York and Boston, each tenement house in average over 65 people. During the 1850s, the railroad house or railroad tenement was introduced. This structure was a solid rectangular block with a narrow alley in the back. The structure was typically 90 feet long and had 12 to 16 rooms, about each 6 feet by 6 feet, and holding around 4 people. So the facility allowed no direct light or air into the room except those facing the street or alley. Further complicating this structure was the lack of privacy for the tenants, a lack of hallways eliminated by semblance of privacy, right? So open sewers, a single privy in the back of the building, and uncollected garbage resulted in an objectable and unhygienic place to live. Additionally, the wood construction common at the time, coupled with a coal and wood heating, made fire an ever-present danger. As a result of a series of tenement fires in 1860 in New York, such terms as death trap and fire trap were coined to describe the poorly constructed living facility. All right, so that's that information, and that came from CDC.gov. Okay, and the title of that is the Chapter 1 Housing History and Purpose. That's from CDC.gov. I hope my sound is clear. I hope you guys can still hear me. All right. So now I want to go into the wiki source. So wiki source talk about public housing, right? Get into that. Boom. Now here's the information. Boom. Check this out. What is public housing? Public housing is a form of house tenure in which the property is usually owned by a government authority, either central or local. Although the common goal of public housing is to provide affordable housing, the detailed terminology, definition of property, and other criteria for allocation vary within different contexts, right? So in the United States, public housing developments are classified as either housing projects that are owned by a city's housing authority or federally subsidized public housing operated through HUD. All right. And so it goes in and talk about social housing, which is any rental housing that may be owned and managed by the state, by a nonprofit organization, or by the combination of the two, usually within the aim of providing affordable housing, right? And it says it's generally rationed by a government through some form of means testing or through administrative measure of housing need, right? And it says also private housing is a form of housing tenure in which the property is owned by an individual, private developer, or by a nonprofit organization. Private owned apartment complexes are multifamily subsidized housing where the subsidy is given to the owner who provides affordable housing. This subsidy stays with the property. So we call that today mixed housing income. Okay. So we call that mixed housing today. So now they done went from tearing down these projects and to building mixed housing income. So mean that those who have Section 8 vouchers, they can get into those apartments, and those who just work regular jobs, they can live in those areas as well. Okay. But then we have to question again, what is affordable housing? When you say affordable housing, who is it afforded to? And at what level, what income requirement do they meet to have so-called affordable housing? Hmm? But anyways, let's get down to the one in the United States, right? So it says in the 19th century and early 20th century, government involvement in housing for the poor was chiefly in the introduction of building standards. Atlanta, Georgia's Techwood, dedicated in 1935, were the nation first public housing project. Most housing communities were developed from the 1930s onward, and initial housing was largely slum clearance, with the requirement insisted upon by private builders that for every unit of public housing constructed, a unit of private housing would be demolished. Okay. And then what did it say? Check this out. This also eased concern of the establishment by eliminating or altering neighborhoods commonly considered a source of disease and reflected progressive era sanitation initiative. Moreover, public housing, along with the federal highway program, demolished the older substandard housing of communities of color across the United States. It says, however, the advance of makeshift tent communities during the Great Depression caused concern in the administration. The federal public housing program was created by the 1937 Act, in which operation was sustained primarily by tenant rents. As a result, public housing in its earliest decade was usually much more working class and middle class and white than it was by the 1970s. Many Americans associate large multi-story towers with public housing. But early projects were actually low-rise, though Le Corbusier superblocks caught on before World War II. Uh-oh. Now, again, this is all under who? This was all under Franklin D. Roosevelt, right? And under his New Deal, check this out. It says a unique U.S. public housing initiative was the development of the subsidized middle class housing during the late New Deal, under the auspices of the Mutual Ownership Defense Housing Division of the Federal Works Agency, under the direction of Colonel Lawrence Westbrook. These 8 projects were purchased by the residents after the Second World War, and as of 2009, 7 of the projects continue to operate as mutual housing corporation owned by their residents. These projects are among the very few definitive success stories in the history of the U.S. public housing effort. All right. Then it goes on to say that public housing was only built with the blessing of the local government, and projects were almost never built on suburban greenfields, but through regeneration of older neighborhoods, the destruction of tenements, and eviction of their low-income residents consistently created problems in nearby neighborhoods with soft real estate markets. Houses, apartments, and other residential units are usually subsidized on a rent geared to income basis. Some communities have now embraced a mixed income with both assisted and market rents when allocating homes as they become available. All right, so as you can see, most of places now in the United States going to their mixed income as opposed to public housing. All right. And now again, all this was under the New Deal. And along with the New Deal came the whole GBI bill and the Social Security Act, disability, etc. Okay. All that came along with it. So this was part of the New Deal by Franklin D. Roosevelt. All right. And one of the federal public housing projects that was under the New Deal, the first one in the United States, was Techwood. But then we will learn some information about Techwood in a moment. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and share you guys this book right here. It's called Black Mecca, Politics and Class in the Making of Modern Atlanta by Maurice J. Hobson, right? So I always share this book for a reason. And now in this book, let's go into the history about Techwood. So you guys give me a moment. All right, so check this out. So in this book, it discusses the history of Atlanta, okay, the beginning of from the time that it was founded to all the way up to the current state. Okay. So now in this book, he talks about the housing project. So in this section, which deals with housing, right? Let's go into it. It says in 1968, the Kernel report suggests that poor housing conditions for Atlanta's blacks were one of the major concerns for the city's administration. So it says in the 1936, public housing was initiated in Atlanta when the Ted Wood homes were built to accommodate people of all races. However, by the 1960s, housing discrimination in Atlanta prevent access to many higher quality living areas, particularly in the suburbs where quality housing existed. Landlords created back pressure that made it possible to break up apartments for denser occupancy while maintaining higher rents and deteriorated ghetto housing than rents in a truly free market. In 1968, approximately 30 slumlords in Atlanta rented to 50,000 occupants in ghetto areas. Most of the slumlords were white, and 75% of the renters were black. Okay, and then he also talked about in this book how when the Olympics first came in, the city of Atlanta was chosen to host the Olympic, and it became the home of Olympics. So around 1990. Okay, so it wasn't until they started doing the demolition process around 1993, 94. Okay, that's when they started doing that. And Ted Wood happened to be one of the first to be torn down because they wanted to make room for the Olympics. All right, but let me go ahead and continue on in this book. And it says that tight restriction on where blacks could live combined with a continuing influx of new residents led to a profound housing shortage. And the housing that was available was largely substandard. In the 1960s, there were between 17,000 and 19,000 units of substandard housing in Atlanta, and between 1,000 and 1,200 units were deemed dilapidated, right? So dilapidated means they was in horrible condition and terrible, etc. Right. But anyways, for middle class white Atlanta, no such shortage exists, as evidenced by the steady stream of advertisement for new houses in the Sunday classified section of the Atlanta Journal. Only a few of these housing units were open to poor Atlantans, and even fewer were open to poor black Atlantans. Okay, so then it goes on to say in 1967, Mayor Allen around announced a drive to build 9,800 public housing units by the end of 1968 and 7,000 the following year. This undertaking total about 1,000 acres of land, right? However, the idea met resistance from Atlanta's white middle class communities who believed that public housing in their neighborhood would ruin their community. So these white folks didn't want no public housing. They was putting up a fight against that. They said, no, we don't want this because it would destroy our community. It will make our community bad. So therefore, they didn't want to live nowhere close to Negroes. They didn't want to live next to them. So for all the folks out there that want to talk about folks, right, who in these projects, right, and who was able to make a come up to live in the suburbs and talking and looking down on folks who still in the projects, you better understand this. Your parents, your ancestors did not have it easy. Okay. This was one of the fights was housing. Because some racist ass people did not want them to live next to them. They didn't want them to be around or in their proximity. So what did they do? They put up a fight to make sure that these people could not live in a comfortable environment. All right. So before you get on your high horse and talk about how you live in suburban and how you living better than everybody else, whoopty whoopty woo, and you looking down on somebody else because of the demographic they live in, you better study the history. You know what I'm saying? Even you so-called black elites out there, y'all better study y'all damn history because you wouldn't be a black elite if it wasn't for those former slaves that was in that position, okay? And I'm just saying, though, I mean, the shit is not fair. It's not fair, but this is what people do. They very conceited because they act like they so greater than somebody. They act like if it's that easy to get out the damn hood to go into the suburb. It's not. And history shows it's not. Okay? Now, going back to the book. It says, however, the idea met resistance from Atlanta's white middle class community, right? Who believe that public housing in their neighborhoods will ruin their communities. As much as voters want to rid the city of slums, the same voters want no part of the solution, which would inevitably involve building new public housing for the black and poor. When the city attempted to get land rezoning for public housing in Southwest Atlanta, Cascade Heights, the citizens in the area arose in indignation and defeated the motion, saying that there was too much public housing in the area to begin with. Now, this is dealing with Atlanta history, okay? You guys need to get this book. If you haven't, I recommend y'all to check this book out. But that's how they felt about public housing. You know, the white middle class folks didn't want no public housing in their area or nearby. No, they didn't want that. They said, "Well, look, you're gonna have to find something else because we didn't want that." And there's some history dealing with the whole concept about the middle class in Atlanta. Where black people couldn't live in a particular neighborhood is called Peyton Wall. So let me go ahead and put up Peyton Wall real quick, right? Let me post that up and then I'm gonna get back to this subject. So let's look up Peyton, Atlanta. Now watch this. Check this out. Watch this. So I'm gonna go into a little bit of this and I'm going to revisit this subject again. But watch it. It says Atlanta's Berlin Wall, also known as the Peyton Road Affair or the Peyton Wall, refers to an event during the civil rights movement in Atlanta, Georgia, United States in 1962. On December 17th of that year, the government of Atlanta, led by Atlanta Mayor Ivan Allen Jr., a barricade, erected a barricade in the Cascade Heights neighborhood, mostly along Peyton Road, for the purpose of dissuading African Americans from moving into the neighborhood. The act was criticized by many African American leaders and civil rights groups in the city. And on March the 1st of the following year, the barricade were ruled unconstitutional and removed. The incident is seen as one of the most public examples of white Americans' fear of racial integration in Atlanta. Okay? So going down here, it says the background. The Cascade Heights is a affluent neighborhood of Atlanta located in the southwestern part of the city. During the early 1960s, the neighborhood and the surrounding area began to undergo a racial transformation as many African Americans began to move into the area. So in December 1962, Clinton Warner, a D-Day veteran civil rights activist and founding member of the Morehouse School of Medicine, purchased a home in Peyton Forest, a white subdivision in Cascade Heights. The contractor, who had sold the house under the financial difficulties at the time and had been unable to find a white buyer for the house, shortly thereafter, the neighborhood began to experience block busting, wherein several of the white homeowners, fearful that more African Americans would move into their neighborhood, began to sell their properties to real estate agents who then sold the properties to African Americans at a higher price. Okay? So following this, white homeowners in the neighborhood asked Atlanta Mayor Ivan Allen Jr. to erect a barricade along Peyton Road and Harlan Road to deter more African Americans from moving into the area. So the Atlanta Board of Aldermen approved their request on December 17, and Allen signed it into law later that day, with work on the barricade starting the next day. So Rodney M's Cook Sr. was one of the few aldermen to vote against the barricade. Cook gave an impassioned speech at the Georgia State Capitol against the wall, which, according to his son, led to the Ku Klux Klan burning a cross in his front yard. Following the erection of the barricade, Cook, who was also a member of the Georgia House of Representatives, would introduce a resolution to remove the wall. The barricade was seen as part of a larger effort by Allen to prevent encroachment and penetration into white neighborhoods of Southwest Atlanta, and months later, Allen had vetoed a proposal to establish an African American cemetery near Westview Cemetery in the area, along with the barricade. So Allen intended to rezone about 800 acres of commercial land north of Payton Forest to serve as a residential area for African Americans. This land, which was mostly unused, was previously being used as a racial barrier. Hmm. And see, that's the history in Atlanta. Again, I'm going to revisit that subject, but just to show you, this is how they was trying to keep black people from moving into those areas and moving into those suburbs. They could not go into those suburbs. So you gotta remember, white people, they was opposing it. They didn't want any more public housing. So, and they didn't want black people moving into their neighborhood. So where the black folks was gonna go? All right, let me see. It says, "Fast when we did stay in comfortable environments, they did everything to sabotage us." Oh yes, they did that for a reason. Now, I want to show you guys another book I have in handy right here. This comes from my personal archive. Okay, this book is called "The Politics of Public Housing" by Rhonda Y. Williams. Black women struggle against urban inequality. See, I strongly recommend this book. I had shared this book before, but I'm sharing it again for a reason. Because a lot of our mothers, our grandmothers, right, they really put up a fight to make sure that children can live in a safer environment. So they form a lot of coalition, right, a lot of community events to get people involved to speak out against inadequate housing issues, um, the horrible condition, the rents, etc. Okay. There's a documentary about East Lake Meadows. The name of the book is called Politics of Public Housing. All right, I'm gonna post it up for you so you can see it. Politics of Public Housing. Okay. Black Women Struggles Against Urban Inequality by Rhonda Y. Williams. All right. All right. That's the name of this book. And this book right here is Black Mecca: Politics and Class in the Making of Modern Atlanta. So in this book, I want to share some information. All right, so watch this. So race and residential limits, right? The dilapidated, overcrowded, and racially constrained housing, which helped spur the reform movement towards government subsidized housing, has its roots in the early 20th century. As people swelled cities' population, securing decent housing became difficult. Many working class people, including ethnic immigrants, experienced horrendous living conditions. But the politics of race and geography particularly limit black people housing opportunities. The city's white residents and power brokers sought to contain black people's living space and to protect their white community from infiltration, right? And it says enormous housing demands, however, resulted in black people spilling into white neighborhoods, especially since no new streets or subdivision were built for black residents until public housing in the late 1930s. And it goes on to say, in the wake of such hardship, public housing will offer a way out, a chance, and possible strategy for obtaining adequate, affordable, and sanitary housing in respectable neighborhoods. Now, while they did provide sanitary housing, but sanitation didn't last very long because people needs were not met. People were starting to experience issue in the household. So again, these women end up putting up the fight. They said, well, we need to address the concerns of not only rat infestation, but roach infestation. right? Mold, lead poisoning, and also crime that's happening. See, what people don't understand, when you have poverty, there will be crime. So when there is poverty, there is going to be crime. You cannot expect people who live in poverty to be civilized or to be the most civilized individuals in their country. You cannot expect that because they in dire need. They're trying to find a way to survive out the ghetto or out the hood. They trying to find a way to get around suffering. So what are they going to do? They're going to rebel. Now we have a current situation right now where this whole thing about the cop city. So the cop city is where the city is supposed to be building some type of training facility for the cops, right? And so they are purchasing over. It's supposed to be like over 387 acres of land in the area. And that area is predominantly where black people are at. Now that area is like a forest wooded area as well, where people go and they like adventure around, take walks and things like that. But because Cop City is going to be built over there in that area, a lot of people in that location, right, is going to be displaced and they're not going to have anywhere to go. All right. So this is an issue of housing, and it's an issue of, is there going to be more police crimes taking place? If there's going to be more police brutality happening. So, anyways, get down to it. That kind of hit close home to me because I grew up in that area and I'm kind of familiar with the area they was talking about. So I'm pretty much familiar with it. Anyways, one of the activists was killed recently by the police. All right. So according to information, he allegedly had a shootout with the state patrol. And what did the state patrol do? The state patrol decided that they was going to kill him. So they did. They killed this man. And that what sparked the whole protest. And there was a riot that initially took place behind it. So it's already a protest that people are frustrated because here you is trying to bring Cop City, right? You're trying to bring it in a predominantly black community, not in any other community, not in the suburbs, not in the area where you got all the white people at, right? But you're going into a predominantly black community and you bringing Cop City. Now, what that's going to look like to the black residents? Now they growing more concerned because they worried about, oh, is there going to be more police brutality taking place? There's going to be more of us getting killed by these folks. And where are we going to go now that they building a lot of things? So it makes you wonder, well, what's the whole purpose? What's their initial purpose? You can't help but to wonder what the initial purpose of a cop city. Hmm? You can't help but to wonder because you don't know what their whole purpose is. You don't know if they trying to, build more, get more cops to be more militant minded and kill more civilians. You know, but yeah, that's the issue. That's the issue, though. And also, what people don't even talk about is the poverty in the suburbs, because there's poverty taking place in the suburbs as well. But that's going to be a whole other topic in itself. Okay, and I have some articles that can back that up too. But this is growing concern for a lot of the people, a lot of the residents, especially the black residents, because now you're building a so-called cop city in the area where most of us are living at. Why could you go anywhere else? You tell me you couldn't find any land in the suburbs? You had to come where we at? It sounds like a form of harassment, right? It sounds like a form of scare tactic. But so yeah, that's the current situation that's going on right now. All right, let me go and get two more sources for you guys. Well, actually, I got three more. So this book right here is called "From the Puritans to the Projects: Public Housing and Public Neighbors" by Lawrence J. Bell. All right, so I'm gonna show you the name of the book. All right, so that's the name of the book right there. So from the Puritans, public housing, and public neighbors to the projects. So now let me go into the information in this book. All right, so the introduction deals with the public and public housing, and then it goes in public housing as an American problem, housing the public neighbor, public housing in Boston. Okay. All right, so let's go into the introduction. So I'm gonna read the introduction to you guys. No. All right. So it goes on to say public housing has become a deeply embedded artifact of American culture, but it has entered the body politic more in the manner of a splendor, unintended, painful, and difficult to dislodge. This book seeks to not remove public housing, but rather to explain our collective discomfort with it. Oh, so it says to do so entails exploring the nature and extent of public obligation to socially and economically marginal people in America, as expressed through more than 350 years of culturally produced decision about how and where such people should live. So, in this historical context, the large public owned housing projects built in every large American city during the mid 20th century may be seen not as a unique and isolated phenomenon, but as one manifestation of a continuing struggle. It is a struggle marked by a wide variety of partial and unsatisfactory resolution dating back at least in New England to the time of the Puritans. So before there were public housing projects, there were model tenement zoning laws and philanthropic developers that were settlement housing, working class suburbs, and private charities that were tax advantage for homeowners, land bounty, and for worthy veterans, homestead at opportunity for thrifty pioneers. There were overseers of the poor, pamper auction, and laws of settlement, and there were almshouses, Bridewells, and House of Industry. Okay, so let's go further down. Let me give me a moment. All right, so down here it says public housing as an American problem. Right, so it goes on to say, by comparison with other Western countries, supporting the United States for subsidized low income housing began belatedly and reluctantly and has remained extremely limited. Today, less than 2% of the U.S. population reside in public housing, in contrast to at least 20% in other industrialized countries. So, in the United States, where the prevailing American industrialist ethos is implements in ownership of a single family home. Public housing exposes a central tension in American culture. It raises uncomfortable questions about how Americans should live, where they should live, and with whom they should live, and forces government leaders to decide how to answer. Whether seen as a collection of physical artifacts, right, or as an evolving set of policy ideas, public housing has been both a product and an instigator of bitter local, states, and national debates. So it goes on to say, at the core, the controversy over public housing is a debate about the form and purpose of state subsidized neighborhoods in a society that places ideological values on individual home ownership and the unfiltered operation of private marketing in the United States, where individuals' liberty have been long been given broad guarantees. Government action in the field of housing has also always worked to enhance these freedoms. In this context, the very concept of public housing introduces a special strand, as Claire Cooper Marcus commented more than 20 years ago. In a society in which personal identity and domestic place are thoroughly intertwined, public housing makes for a poor ideological fit. America is the home of the self made man, and if the house is seen even unconsciously as a symbol of self, then it is small wonder that there is a resistance to the states providing houses for people. The frontier image of the man clearing the land and building a cabin for himself is not far behind us. To a culture inbred with this image, the house self identity is particularly strong. In some barely conscious way, society has decided to penalize those who, through no fault of their own, cannot build, buy, or rent their own housing. All right, so again, this is the title of the book, and if you guys don't have this book, you should get it. It's called From Puritans, Public Housing, and Public Neighbors to the Projects by Lawrence J. Vale. All right, so that's the title of the book, and that was the information that I read from. So you guys need to go ahead and get that book as well. All right, let's see what else. Um, so there's this book, and I strongly recommend you all to actually get this book. Um, let's see. All right, so here's this book right here. This book is called Red Hot City. So Red Hot City is called Housing, Race, and Exclusion in the 21st Century Atlanta by Dan Immergluck. So he talks about he basically speaks on the whole housing issue and also the race um, segregation and whatnot. So he gets into the concept about redlining, public housing, gentrification, and also he gets into the whole thing about yeah, he gets into the whole thing about public housing, etc. So that book just came out in 2022, but I recommend you guys get this book as well. Okay, good source. All right, now also this last book, and I just want to share with y'all because I think this book is very intriguing, which is called Public Housing Myth: The Perception, Reality, and Social Policy, which is written by Nicholas Dagenblum and Fritz Umbach and Lawrence J. Vale. So, all right, so it's edited, but this book is like very I think it's very interesting because it talks about the public housing myths. So, and there's a lot of mythology that center around the concept about public housing. Okay. So right here, you got the introduction, then you got places. Myth number one, public housing stand alone. Myth number two is moderates. Uh, architecture failed public housing. Myth number three, public housing breeds crime. And myth number four, high rise public housing is unmanageable. Okay. All right. So let's look at the one they talk about breeding crime. Hmm. All right. So maybe I can't get to that. Hold on. All right, so okay, so in this preview, it goes all the way up to myth number one. So it's just a preview. I don't have the actual book, but it says public housing stands alone, which is a myth, right? And so basically, it explains why it's considered as a myth. So I just want to go ahead and show you guys this. All right, so here's the book, and here's the title: Public Housing Myths. Okay, some of y'all might be familiar with, some of y'all may not be familiar with it. Anyways, so let's go down here. Public housing staying alone. All right, so let's see. Okay, so it says one of the most durable myths about public housing in the United States that it stands alone, operating in isolation from the city and neighborhoods that surround it. The very terms that we use to describe public housing projects, or the projects, encapsulate this myth of distinctiveness and separation. After all, we seldom refer to a suburban neighborhood as a housing project. Instead, we use terms like subdivision that suggest belonging to something greater. While this essay used the term project to refer to a particular public housing site, it is with the understanding that it is a vernacular rather than technical term. It says certainly the architectural and spatial condition of public housing, from rigidly drawn boundaries to tower and slab construction, reinforces perception of separateness. The common identification of public housing as a landscape produced by federal government, while inaccurate isolated projects from the political life of neighborhoods and city. The wide variety of rules and regulation and criteria for living in public housing seem to separate it as a form of tenancy from the most private rental markets. Perhaps more ironically, the response by housing authorities to the decline of projects in their portfolios, barbed wire fencing, consolidation of tenants into fewer buildings, deferred maintenance, and demolition provide the most dramatic iconography of separateness. Wow. So it says forensic efforts to account for the decline of public housing have largely reinforced the idea of projects as islands apart. Nowhere has this been more evident than in the cottage industry of criticism surrounding Purity Ago, a large housing project constructed in St. Louis, Missouri in the 1950s. Even the titles of now classic texts encapsulate the myth. From Lee Randwater's Behind Ghetto Walls, Black Feminists in a Federal Slum, to the Williams Moore vertical Ghetto Everyday Life in an Urban Slum. This chapter compares Purity Ago with projects in other cities in order to dismantle the myth that the fate of public housing projects are somehow separated from the fate of the cities and regions of which they are a part. All right. So it goes into the history about the federal role, the New Deal, 1937. All right. So, anyways, if you guys are interested, please get this book. And me, myself, and I'm going to make sure that this book is in my archive, okay? Because it seems to be very interesting. So that way we can dispel the myth and whatnot about public housing, okay? But anyways, so that's all the information I got to share. All right, I know that was a lot, but it was not really a whole lot. But again, when you get into the field of dealing with something, especially like field research, right, it's going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot. So what I try to do, I try to make my videos not as long because again, that's dealing with a lot of research and dealing with a lot of sources. But anyways, now let's get into the let's talk about the future. Well, what the future may look like for those um who are dealing with low income. What is our future for the working class and low income people? That's the question. Well, we don't know what the future may hold because we only living in the now. That's the best way to answer. We don't really know. But what we do know is that capitalism, which is the economic system that we live in, right? And not just the economic system in the United States, let's be honest, it's a global economic system, okay? Has made it extremely hard for the working class and the poor people to move their way up to the top. So going back to what I was talking about in the beginning, people think it is very easy to get out of one situation and get to where you need to be, and it's not. And please do not bring condemnation to those who have worked hard by saying that they don't work hard enough. Well, these people work their asses off, and many of them died poor. Many of them died poor because they try to fight and try to make sure that their family are living comfortably, being able to make sure they can provide a roof over people's head. This is not easy. It's not like a walk in the park type of thing. Okay, this kind of explains why there are people that commits crime and do things like that. You know what I'm saying? So I was trying to get into the section about public housing. Um, Public housing breed crimes. No, public housing does not breed crime. What breeds crime is poverty. That's what breed crimes. That's what brings it. So it's like poverty begots crime and revolution. Again, poverty begets crime and revolution. And what I mean by that, it gives birth to crime. So it's not the fact that people live in poor housing or people live in public housing projects or subsidized housing. It's the fact that people living in poverty. And as I mentioned before, you got people that's in the suburbs that's living in poverty that we don't know about and that we don't often hear about. We thinking that, oh, they living good because they in a nice home, they driving a nice car, but nobody knows that those people that got laid off. Those people are struggling behind a mortgage. They struggling on their bills. They struggling on their car payments. You never know. So poverty is not just equivalent to those in the inner city, but it can also be equivalent to those in the suburbs. However, the people in the suburbs know how to disguise themselves, as opposed to people in the inner city. They actually live in it, like you actually see it. So it's no way to really disguise it because you won't see it right. It's right in front of you. You can't really get away from it. You know what I'm saying? And also the thing about living in the urban community, you also more than likely be exposed to toxin and pollution than anywhere else because you may live in an area where there is a warehouse and they have all type of chemicals coming out of the building, right? You might live in an area where there is the trash disposable facility where trash are being disposed after the city come and collect the trash. You know what I mean? Go back to the word ghetto. What does the word ghetto really mean? To cast away, to throw away. So the ghetto was intentionally used as the what? It was used as an area to dispose trash. So if you living in the hood, right? You living in the city or you live in the public housing projects in the hood, Nine times out of ten, you're going to be exposed to constant pollution because those areas, right? They're either used for chemical laboratory, or I mean not chemical laboratory, but warehouse where they have chemical operation going on, or they dispose trash. I mean, so again, people make do of how they going to survive. Many people try to figure out, well, what's the best way to survive. I mean, you got people who may work a job and you thinking they making decent income, but when there's a cost of living going up, that one job is not going to pay enough alone. So they're going to have to figure out a way how to keep up with the other bills. And Umar Johnson says it the best. So shout out to brother Umar Johnson. He said, "Do you blame people? Do you blame people for committing crime? Do you blame people for selling drugs? No, you don't blame people for selling drugs because look at the predicament they are in." So, and he's right. You don't blame folks who trying to survive or trying to make a way out of no way, especially if they've been laid off. And then don't try to apply for food stamps and all of that, or you may not be qualified for that because you made too much money. So people going to find a way to make a way out of no way. They're going to find a way to make a hustle. Even those who work within the white collar industry, right? Working within the government, they're trying to make a way because a lot of times those government workers, they don't make decent money like you think. Depends on what type of work they're doing, but they don't make decent money like that. I know people. What's going on? Shout out to you, brother. Peace. Salam alaikum. Thank you for coming through. I know people who have worked as social workers, right? Who work in the Department of Children and Family Services, okay? And they tell me that they don't even make enough money. Now, I know it don't really have nothing to do with the subject in itself, but it kind of ties into it a little bit. Now, these people work in family departments of children services, right? And they social workers, but they don't make a lot of money. Now, you working for the government and you're not getting paid enough. Again, it depends on what type of occupation you do. So, what that goes to show you, a person that get a bachelor's degree, they make about $40,000. That's not enough money. How they gonna cover their debts? So that's why you got the folks in the hood thinking, well, shit, I might as well not even go to college because I'm not gonna make enough money. I can make that kind of money on the street. $45,000, I can make that on the street. That would be fast money for me if I got the right connect. And the reason why people choose to stay in public housing because it's affordable to them. It's like shit, it's cheap as hell. It's cheap to live in public housing, or it's cheap to get Section 8 vouchers because that way I could save up my money and I could do what I want, and I ain't got to go out here and worry about the increase on my rent, etc. It's affordable. Now we know people do reckless things and ignorant things and not take care of their priority. We do know people do things like that, but at the same time, for people trying to make sure that they have somewhere to sleep, they're going to do whatever it takes to live in those type of places because that's all they can afford. Okay, that's all they can afford. So, but going back to the concept about public housing, you cannot sit up here and make fun of people who live in those type of conditions or live in those communities because where else they gonna go? Where else they gonna go? And most of the people that's ahead of household that live in those areas are women with children. Most of the time, yeah, you got certain men living there, but most of the time it's mostly women with children. Now, if you a woman and you got kids. Now I'm talking about you ain't gonna be able to afford to move anywhere else. You got too much on your hand. So you gonna take what is given to you. Because we don't get paid like that as women in America. Again, it depends on what type of field that you're working in, right? But overall, let's be honest, a lot of these women don't get paid like that. That's why you got someone. That's why you got a lot of them out here scamming. They out there scamming. They out here corrupting the system, infiltrating the system, however they can, because they not getting paid like that. I mean, we gotta look at the situation. We gotta be straight up. We ain't making enough money. And it's gonna take 229 years for the African American family to catch up with the white family. 229 years for you as a black person, right, to catch up with your white counterpart. Oh, we talking about collectively. We ain't talking about individually. We talking about collectively, right? It's gonna take 229 years. That's a long way to go. That's a long way to go. And you don't really have access to capital, meaning you don't really have access to money. You don't have money set aside for you. So that's a long way to go. So it's like you got to scrap the money up for you to get up out of your situation. You got to scrap it up. You got to build yourself up. And you have to do that most of the time by getting involved in illegal activity. I mean, they put the drugs in our community, right? So if they put the drugs in our community, which is another conversation we're gonna have to get into, when you got the crack cocaine and now you got the pills and the lean and all the other stuff taking place, you're gonna go there because you see that that is the way to go. And you can be able to market the price however you want it at an affordable price. And it's not just something that's happening within your city and within your state, but it's just a nationwide thing. As a matter of fact, it's global. So we didn't bring those drugs in our community. They was brought to us. And we just happened to be able to sell them on the street. When I say we, I'm not talking about myself personally, but I'm talking about, our people. They was able to find a way to be able to market themselves. I mean, market the drugs and be able to sell it and be able to make profit. I mean, it's a dirty game and I don't approve of it. And I'm quite sure there's others that don't approve it, but I understand the business behind it. You know what I'm saying? But anyways, and the housing project, it happens also housing project happens to be used as a trap house. These housing projects be used as trap houses so people can sell their dope. I mean, just being straight up. But anyways, that's all I have to say. Thank you all for watching my video. Please make sure you like and subscribe to my channel. Hit the notification bell. Until then, this is your girl Tiffany. I'm logging off saying peace and power elevation be to all of you. And I will come back on here the next time. So y'all be safe. Peace, deuces. And for those of you that's just coming in, you have to watch the videos from the very beginning to see what the subject is about and what I'm talking about. I hope you guys like it. And sorry for how things were going earlier. I had some technical issues, so I don't know what's going on with the technicality. It happens sometimes, but I'm glad that I was able to get this video across. All right, but make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. Until then, y'all take it easy, peace and power elevation. This is your girl Tiffany.